Hello, my name is host Eric, and I'm your anchor tonight on Talking with Famous People News. We're going to be discussing a number of current events in a short amount of time, so please pay close attention. Topic 1. Breivik makes a Nazi salute at the start of the court case in Norway. Now, I begin with this one because what you have here is basically the poster child for racial hatred dysfunction. He's a handsome gentleman, and he very much looks like a Nazi soldier. He's like super white. And he began his court return in which he's complaining that his conditions are inhuman in his prison cell by making this Nazi salute. Now, it seems odd to me that somebody who has massacred 77 people would complain again about the state of his prison conditions. After all, he didn't afford any such conditions to his victims, so why he would feel entitled to any such good conditions is beyond me. However, I do understand that Norway should be respected and affirmed for its generally positive and consistent position on human rights and its willingness to treat even the worst criminals in accordance with the basic principles from which it derives its laws. So good job, Norway. Bad job, Breivik. That's why I think occasionally you have to have the death penalty, and he should have been put to death immediately, barbaric or not. Death penalty, good idea? No, absolutely not. But I'll say this: for him, yeah, he killed 77 people. Well, fuck you. Die, motherfucker. Killed 77 people. Die. Next topic. Okay, so I started with the white guy and the racist bullshit because the very next story next to it was yet another Islamic nut job playing Islamic nut job. 27-year-old Canadian man said, Allah told me to come here and kill people at a double stabbing at a military recruitment center in Toronto, police said Tuesday. Yes, that's right. Ayani Hassan Ali has been charged with 1 count of attempted murder, 2 counts of assault with a weapon, 2 weapon charges, and 1 assault charge. Alright, so just to be really clear and remind everyone of these simple facts that sometimes we all forget. Islam is bad. Okay, Islam's awful. Muslims either are actively working against the standard incarnation of their religion, or they're engaged in bad behavior. It's oppressive to women, yada, yada, yada. So we should all start addressing Islamic terrorism by hating Islam, in the same way that we hate racist ideologies that result in the massacre of 77 people. We should hate misogynistic ideologies like Islam. Nobody should ever say something like Islam's the religion of peace, or don't be Islamophobic, or Muslims are just like you and me. Well, that's true if you're saying also that Breivik there is just like you and me. Is he just like you and me? No? How about members of the Ku Klux Klan who don't kill people? Are they just like you and me? Why do you not afford the same condemnation to the so richly deserving institution of Islam and its deplorable track record about human rights and its persistent oppression of women? Good question. Okay, so what we see there is ideologies that excuse killing or violence because they don't like the way that you think that their ideologies shouldn't be dominant ideologies. Well, those people are scumbags. Now let's go on to the next thing. Harvard Law shield tied to slavery is already disappearing after corporation bill. So Harvard got rid of this shield, this coat of arms or whatever. And the reason it did it is because it has on it 3 bushels of wheat. And it's based on the family crest of a wealthy slave-owning family, Isaac Royal Jr., who endowed Harvard's first law professorship with the bequest in his will, and in the 1930s, the image with 3 sheaves of wheat was adopted by the institution. So, apparently sheaves of wheat are associated with slavery. Or, it doesn't matter about the sheaves of wheat, it's just that, well, the guy who designed it was a slave owner. Alright. No, Harvard. First of all, it's not like you have pictures of black people being whipped on your shield. You've got sheaves of wheat. There are lots of sheaves of wheat in the world that have been generated without slavery. Why, I generated 4 or 5 sheaves of wheat just yesterday. So, why in the world would you insist that the sheaf of wheat be removed when it has nothing to do itself with slavery? And if you are saying that the whole crest should be removed because it is based on or designed by somebody who owned slaves, well, what does that have to do with the design of the crest? Nothing. Look, if you say, well, I don't like your negative rights position, Eric, but I tell you, well, here's an interesting idea about cognitive functions. Should you dismiss my cognitive function idea because you don't like my position on negative rights? No, they're unrelated. Just as the ownership of slaves by the designer of the shields here is not related to the content of the shield's design. So he can own slaves and make a slave-owning shield, then you would have reason to say that's slave-owning, pro-slave owning, and we should not have that. If you're a slave-owning person and you make a non-slave-owning themed shield, then the fact that you own slaves is irrelevant to the merit of the shield, which is what's being changed. Nobody's going to be able to go back in time and smack around the slave owner who designed the shield and punish him for his slave owning. That's unfortunate. That does not mean we need to say, therefore, everything he did ought to be condemned, no matter how unrelated it is to slave owning. Now, you might point out that agriculture is the product of slave owning, but that is non-unique. There is no reason to assume that those sheaves of wheat are produced by slaves, and there's nothing in the image to suggest that they've been produced by slaves beyond the knowledge that is external to that image, namely about the individual who made the image, which is, of course, not relevant. So, let's go on to my tripentultimate story, my third to last. Alright, FBI Apple fight over encryption. Let's talk about that for a second. With whom do I side? Well, Apple, of course. But not for the reasons you think. People don't have a right to privacy. There's no reason to assume they should. They do have a right to property, but the phones in question are no longer the property of the people in question who are dead. So there's no property rights being violated to look into their phone. And additionally, there's no right to privacy anyway. So, now if it's a property, if they're still alive, it's their property, then they have property rights. And yeah, it's true, they can't access your property without your permission. They can't abuse your property without your permission. So, functionally, it's the same thing as having privacy rights, provided you own the thing you want to be private about. You do not get to insist privacy for your objects in general, but the phone is different. It would qualify as an extension of your body, not as, say, furniture. So, it would be the equivalent of my address book or my wallet, something like that, not an object distinct from yourself that has no, you can't dictate its privacy setting, right? So, like if I have a chair and I put it in my house, well, no one's going to see the chair because it's inside my house. So, the chair is private. Now, if I put it out on the front lawn, people are going to see the chair. And it's no longer private. In fact, they're likely to assume I'm throwing it away if I put it out by the curb, and then I take the chair. That is a different kind of relationship with a physical object than one might have with a cell phone or a wallet. You're never going to put your wallet or your phone in the middle of the front lawn. You're never going to put it by the curb. And to the extent that you can, you're going to keep it on or near your body the whole time. So those are very different things, and they play out very differently in terms of how we understand them and their function as either objects you own or parts of your body, and what kind of privacy that affords you. So naturally, if I own a home, then you can't see through the walls, then I have an expectation of privacy and a right to privacy, but it's not really a right to privacy, it's a right to property, and you're choosing to exercise that right to manifest privacy for yourself. On the other hand, if you're talking about a phone or something, you cannot manifest privacy for yourself by going inside your phone, and you can manifest privacy for your phone because remember, your phone is not an object separate from you. It is a identity facilitation device. It's got lots of stuff about your identity in it. So that is not now an object that you might try to prevent others from seeing or that you might not. It is now instead part of you yourself. So to the extent that you own yourself and are thereby entitled to privacy, that is the extent to which your phone is entitled to privacy. So how much does owning yourself entitle you to privacy? Not at all. Because that's not the kind of property that one can attain privacy from. To say that I have a right to privacy because I own myself and it's derived from my own property rights is to say that when other people look at me without my permission, they violate my rights. And that's obviously not the case. And it can't possibly be a negative right to privacy because it confers a positive duty on others to not seek to not look, to not gather information that happens to come across their path, regardless of how little effort it might take to look at that information or to gather data. So, as a consequence, we are looking at a situation where Apple really ought to just open the phone and show the FBI. But the reason they're right has nothing to do with privacy and has nothing to do with property. It does have to do with an unreasonable, illegal, unjustified, unwarranted demand from the government that a corporation cooperate with its desire to gather data by messing with its own product, namely its operating system, to enable the government to see what's on their phone. So that's not a good reason to see what's on the phone. First of all, government, and you don't need to see what's on their phone. And whatever terrorists there are, I'm sure they didn't leave like the terrorist to-do list plus names on their phone. I'm sure there's a bunch of stuff you already know, a bunch of Islamic bullshit, a bunch of confirmation bias party, you know. Second to last story. These fairy circles. Have you heard about the fairy circle? They're enigmatic circles of sand, burnt orange, almost imperceptibly round by a fringe of tall grass. And they are to be found in various deserts. And a German scientist in 2013 said sand termites were likely the ones who are making these. Sand termites make the fairy circles, and nobody really understood what they were before. And now they've concluded that it's not the termites, it's the plants. They've self-organized. What this means is that the motives for doing so, the plants can really be ascribed to motive, is pretty simple. In a desert environment where water is scarce, the land can only sustain so much vegetation. Attempting to carpet the entire earth with grass would be a recipe for mutually assured destruction. So instead, the plants organize into clumps. Covered areas soak up water from bare areas, and everyone drinks, even when it's been months since the last rainfall. That's how the area around the fairy circles can sustain full-time vegetation when the rest of the Namib desert is desolate except for right after a rain. Interesting. Cool. Let's look at the last topic. Voter fraud. So, one of the things that people talk about periodically is voter fraud, voter turnout, voter restrictions, voter ID, all that kind of stuff. And here we have an article on MSNBC. It's it's designed to appeal to liberals, right? And it says specifically that almost nobody ever gets struck by lightning, and the governor of Texas was quoted as saying fewer Texans commit in-person voter fraud than get struck by lightning, and yet he supported the voter fraud law. And so they're saying, well, there's a contradiction there. Well, there's not necessarily a contradiction there, because there's no reason why one, in theory, wouldn't be against voter fraud, want to pass laws about it without thinking it's a serious problem now. It could think it's going to become a serious problem to prevent it. Or it could say even a single bad vote is a serious problem, so we should do something about it, even though it's not that rampant. Or they could say, that we don't have exactly voter fraud, but we have too many. We're encouraging it by not stopping it, I guess. Some warrant like that. It's all bullshit, of course. It's all completely bullshit. Because although it's encouraging bullshit, frankly, it suggests that the votes actually count, and that they're being counted, and that the parties actually are trying to win votes. That's a little encouraging. The fact that Republicans want to prevent people from voting suggests that it matters. And that is very much not an answered question. Because especially with new voting machines, there's no way of knowing what's actually going on. It's not transparent anymore. And transparency is always the solution for public policy stuff, for government, etc. We want more and more and more and more transparency, more and more exchange of ideas regarding the appropriate purview of government. Why? Because so many of us are walking around America, the United States of America, with a set of assumptions that have been taught to us either by school or parents or deduced unknowingly from data about the world. And these assumptions are fundamentally false. They are misleading us about what ought to be and how it ought to be. They are misleading us about who we are and what we ought to be doing. They are misleading us about what it means to be a good government. They're misleading us about what it means to be a good free society. And they are misleading us about the tolerability of intolerable things that we get used to. So just go down that a little bit and flesh it out. People walk around the world with certain assumptions that taxation is a done deal, not worth thinking about ever, unless there's some particularly egregious tax that arises that seems different than the norm. Number two, most people have an assumption that societal problems are fixed when government takes action, and that when one encounters a societal problem, one should look to the government to address that problem, and that when societal problems arise, it's representative of a failure of government to do what it ought to be doing. Okay, so this is a common assumption that is absolutely false. The government is not there to address social problems like homelessness or poverty or no health care or stuff like that. Absolutely not. That's not what they're for. And that's not ever going to work. All you have to do is look at public schools to see why it's never going to work. It's because nobody owns the thing that's being done in a way that's meaningful enough to produce good outcomes. They're necessarily going to produce just pure parasitic outcomes. So we know this as a mechanism argument about government, that the biggest problem it faces is the inability of anybody who's operating as an agent of government to have any ownership over the institution that they represent out in the field. This is a huge problem because even in the free market, when people are getting paid based somewhat on job performance, there's a problem with complacency, comfort, that you get happy enough with getting your paycheck and you're not really concerned with the job itself, and then you get increasingly detached from the job and increasingly fail to make the link between the job and the paycheck. This is a reality when the job you're doing is not a job, but rather an open-ended, you come here and do what I tell you to do thing. That's fine if there's, one, apprentice-style things to it, or two, the kind of relationship between the boss and the employee that maximizes the autonomy of the employee and maximizes the ownership of the employee. In that sort of situation in flux like I've got with Abraham, it's not going to instantly resolve itself into a satisfying, neat package. But it will at some point as you run through the possible condition, possible, what's that word? Potentialities, I guess. Okay, so what we have learned here today is a lot of different things. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching Talking Defense, people. This has been Current Events, and I've been Current Events, and I've been your news anchor, Eric, here on Talking Defense, people.